Welcome to the Sunday Gardener. The question is, what seeds can I sow in March? The correct answer is you can sow any seeds you like in March, providing you have somewhere warm to grow the seeds on. So if you want to grow chilies and tomatoes and you want to sow them now, you need to have a heated greenhouse, a heated conservatory, or a room in the house which you can devote to the plants growing on. Now that's a luxury which most of us just don't have. So my suggestion is, and I would recommend the place to start in March, is sowing hardy annuals. Hardy annuals and hardy perennials, as the name suggests, are frost hardy. So that means once you've germinated them and got them going and they're a little bit established, they will grow on happily in an unheated greenhouse, in a lean-to against a sunny wall, and in a cold frame, or indeed in an unheated porch, provided there's plenty of sun and good light levels. So what are hardy annuals? Well, they are annuals that will withstand frost. Sometimes things like these sweet peas that we often think of as summer plants are in fact hardy down to -5. So once you've got them germinated, even if it turns pretty cold, they will survive in this unheated greenhouse absolutely fine. Now, to get any plant germinating, or most plants, you need heat. Now I'm using some heated propagators because I was lucky enough to be given 3 heated propagators when I got this greenhouse. But last year I didn't have a greenhouse and I didn't have a garden, and I germinated everything that I'm going to show you today quite successfully in this lean-to, zipped up against a sunny wall. It gets remarkably warm in there. In fact, you need to remember to keep unzipping it and letting some of the heat out if you don't want your seedlings to turn into weedy seedlings. So I'm using heated propagators, and I've already seeded some that we'll look at. But first of all, what can you seed? Well, obviously I've said you can seed sweet peas. They will do absolutely fine in here. In fact, I've planted sweet peas out in March, but it's not ideal because if you get a really cold spell, it will shock them and hold them back. So although they can and will withstand the frost, and if you run out of space, you can put them outside and put a cloche over them, they will be fine. You can also grow them on in an unheated greenhouse to quite sturdy plants. Well, I've got quite a selection here. I've got some thyme, that's a hardy perennial. I've got some of these chives, Siberian chives. Now I've specifically brought this variety of chives because bees love chives. The bees absolutely adore Siberian chives, and that's why I'm going to seed them. And I think they look great on the edges of the border, the lovely slow growing perennial, and good to eat and good for the bees. I've got some parsley I'm going to try. I might try a bit of lettuce. Now what else have we got that's hardy? Well, you can grow calendula, which I grow instead of marigolds because it's not so much slug food. You can grow Cerinthe major, that's a hardy annual, and indeed much loved by bees as well. And what you will find, if I can find an appropriate seed packet, is it will actually say on sensible packets which are well labelled, it will, hardy perennial, hardy biannual, and it will say hardy annual. So when you're going shopping in your garden centre or whatever, look for seed packets that says on the back hardy. This is false bishop's weed. This is a really pretty one, that's hardy as well. So I'm going to sow all of these. Some I've already sowed, and others I'm going to press on with shortly. As a quick word, I'm not going to go into detail about sowing. There's lots of videos about that. There's just 2 or 3 golden rules. Think about the sort of container that you're going to sow into. Make sure you tap down gently the soil so there are no air pockets. The very small roots that come off a seedling, if they hit an air pocket where there's no food, no water, that root isn't going to thrive, and you may find that the plant doesn't thrive. And the other thing is water the soil gently before you put the seed in it, And if you're growing them in propagators, don't leave them in too long. Inside the propagator is quite warm and damp and fuggy, and if you leave the seedling in there, it will grow weedy. So take the tops off to aerate, perhaps put them back on a night when it's cold, and gradually start to move them out, and then you can move your next lot of seeds in, your next set of hardy annuals. And then as the season progresses into April, you can start thinking about sowing the more tender seeds, such as maybe tomatoes, chilies, some of the tender annual plants, such as nasturtiums, because you'll be able to keep them warm with the heat and the sun and wrapped up in either a propagator lid or a zip up on nights when it's cold. So start with the hardy annuals, they're the easiest to sow at this time of year. And a quick word about what you're sowing them in. All sweet peas, and in fact beans, runner beans, French beans, all have long roots, and they need to be grown in these because you sow the seed towards the top, and the root, when you come to empty it, the root will be all the way down there to be full. So I've already sown some in here. In this one, don't know which one of the propagators I'm in, and they're not yet germinated, but they're all labelled because I like to know which colour sweet peas I've got. And I've tried an experiment with soaking some and not soaking some, pre-soaking some seeds, so we'll see whether that actually makes any difference on the germination rates. Now, a lot of regular seeds don't need root trainers. You can just sow those in an ordinary seed tray. This has got Cerinthe major in, and it's lovely and warm. I can feel the gentle heat coming off that propagator. And then think also about the size of seed, because I'm going to sow some sunflowers, and it should say on the back, I think it does say, I've probably ripped the corner off, the hardy annual, and you'll see these are quite a good sized seeds, and you'll know sunflowers, big flowers, big plants. So I'm not going to try and put them into one of those. I'm just going to sow 2 into a small pot, and then once they've established themselves, plant each into an individual pot this size to grow them on into a sturdy plant ready for putting out in the garden. And again, as I said, they are hardy, so if you get pushed for space or you've got a long warm spell, they can go outside and you can begin to harden them off for planting in the garden. So the answer to what can I sow in March is, the sensible thing to sow in March is hardy annuals, because they're easier to grow on in a cool or cold environment. And then as you move through the growing season into April, by April I will start sowing tomatoes, cucumbers, squashes and some of the tender annuals. And then probably at the beginning of May I'll start sowing the very, very tender ones, such as Morning Glory, which is a lovely annual, but it faints at the slightest amount of cold. It just withers. It really needs to be cosseted. So work with the seasons and sow according to the weather, where you live, because it makes a great deal of difference as to how much sunlight you get and how warm it is. Enormous difference between sowing in parts of the Pennines and Scotland, Cornwall and the South Coast. So taking all that into account, you can start sowing now, start with the hardy annuals and move on from there. And I hope this gives you a good idea where to start the sowing season and what to sow in March.